Good morning, year 3 and 4. Just going to carry on with our story. Yesterday, Harry and Ron had met Hermione on the train. She was just introducing herself, saying, "I'm Hermione Granger, by the way, who are you?" She said it all very fast. Harry looked at Ron, and he was relieved to see by his stunned face that he hadn't learnt all the set books off by heart either. "Well, I'm Ron Weasley," Ron muttered. "Harry Potter," said Harry. "Are you really?" said Hermione. "I know all about you. Of course, I got a few extra books for background reading, and you're in the modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. "Am I?" said Harry, feeling quite dazed. "Goodness, didn't you know? I'd have found everything out if I could. If it was me," said Hermione. "Do either of you know what house you're going to be in? I've been asking around, and I hope I'm in Gryffindor. It sounds by far the best. I hear Dumbledore himself was once one. And I suppose Ravenclaw wouldn't be too bad anyway. We'd better go and look for Neville's toad. You two better change, you know. I'll expect we'll be there soon." And she left, taking the toadless boy with her. "Whatever house I'm in, I hope she's not in it," said Ron. He threw his wand back into his trunk. "Stupid spell. George gave it to me. I bet he knew it was a dud." "What house are your brothers in?" asked Harry. "Gryffindor," said Ron. Gloom seemed to be settling on him again. Mum and Dad were in it too. "I don't know what they'll say if I'm not. I don't suppose Ravenclaw would be too bad, but imagine if they put me in Slytherin." "That's the house you know who was in." "Yeah," said Ron. He flopped back in his seat, looking very depressed. "You know, I think the end of Scabbers' whiskers are a bit lighter," said Harry, trying to take Ron's mind off the houses. "So what do your oldest brothers do now they've left anyway?" Harry was wondering what a wizard did once he'd finished school. "Well, Charlie's in Romania studying dragons, and Bill's in Africa doing something for Gringotts," said Ron. "Did you hear about Gringotts? It's been all over the Daily Prophet. But I don't suppose you get that with the Muggles. Someone tried to rob a high-security vault." Harry stared. "Really? What happened to them?" "Nothing, that's why it's such big news. They haven't been caught. My dad said it must have been powerful dark wizard to get round Gringotts, but they don't think they took anything. That's what's very odd. Of course, everyone gets scared when something like this happens, in case you know who is behind it." Harry turned this news over in his mind. He was starting to get a prickle of fear every time "you know who" was mentioned. He supposed this was part of entering into the magic world, but it had been a lot more comfortable saying Voldemort without worrying. "What's your Quidditch team?" Ron asked. I don't know any," Harry confessed. "What?" said Ron, dumbfounded. "Oh, you wait. It's the best game in the world." And he was off, explaining all about the 4 balls, the positions of the 7 players, describing famous games he'd been to with his brothers, and the broomstick he'd like to get if he had the money. He was just taking Harry through the finer points of the game when the compartment door slid open yet again. But it wasn't Neville, it was the toadless boy, or Hermione Granger this time. 3 boys entered, and Harry recognised the middle one at once. It was the pale boy from Madame Malkin's robe shop. He was looking at Harry with a lot more interest than he'd shown back in Diagon Alley. "Is it true," he said. "They're all saying it down the train, that Harry Potter is in this compartment. So, is it you? Is it?" "Yes," said Harry. He was looking at the other boys, both of them with a thick set and looked extremely mean. Standing either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguards. "Oh, this is Crabbe and this is Goyle," said the pale boy, carelessly noticing where Harry was looking. "And my name's Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." Ron gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snigger. Draco Malfoy looked at him. "Do you think my name's funny, do you? Do I need to ask who you are? My father told me all about the Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and have more children than they can afford." He turned back to Harry. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. "I think I can tell who the wrong sort are for myself, thanks," he said coolly. Draco Malfoy didn't go red, but a pink tinge appeared in his pale cheeks. "I'd be careful if I were you, Potter," he said slowly. "Unless you're a bit politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them either. You hang around with riffraff like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and they'll rub off on you." Both Harry and Ron stood up. Ron's face was as red as his hair. "Say that again," he said. "Oh, you're going to fight us, are you, Malfoy?" sniggered at them. "Unless you get out now," said Harry, more bravely than he felt, because Crabbe and Goyle were a lot bigger than him and Ron. "But we don't feel like leaving, do we, boys? We've eaten all our food and you seem to have lots in here." Goyle reached towards the chocolate frogs next to Ron. Ron leapt forward, but before he could as much touch Goyle, Goyle let out a horrible yell. Scabbers the rat was hanging off his finger. Sharp little teeth sunk into Goyle's knuckle. Crabbe and Malfoy backed away as Goyle swung Scabbers round and round, howling, and when Scabbers finally flew off and hit the window, all three of them disappeared at once. Perhaps they thought there were more rats lurking amongst the sweets, or perhaps they'd heard footsteps before a second later Hermione Granger popped in. "What's been going on in here?" she said, looking at the sweets all over the floor and Ron picking up Scabbers by the tail. "I think he's been knocked out," Ron said to Harry. He looked closer at Scabbers. "No, I don't believe it. He's gone back to sleep." And so he had. "You've met Malfoy before," Harry explained about their meeting in Diagon Alley. "I've heard of his family," said Ron darkly. "They were some of the first to come back to our side after you-know-who disappeared. Said they'd been bewitched. My dad doesn't believe it. He says Malfoy's father didn't need an excuse to go over to the dark side." He turned to Hermione. "Can we help you with something? You'd better hurry and put your robes on. I've just been up to the front and asked the driver, and he says that we're nearly there. You haven't been fighting, have you? You'll be in trouble before we even get there." "Scabbers has been fighting, not us," said Ron, scowling at her. "Would you mind leaving while we get changed?" "All right, I only came in here because people outside are behaving very childishly, racing up and down the corridors," said Hermione in a sniffy voice. "And you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know?" Ron glared at her as she left, and Harry peered out of the window. It was getting dark. He could see mountains and forests under a deep purple sky. The train did seem to be slowing down. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled on their long black robes. Ron's was a bit short for him. You could see his trainers underneath. His voice echoed through the train. "We'll be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately." Harry's stomach lurched with nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked pale under his freckles. They crammed their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowd thronging along the corridor. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way towards the door and out of onto a tiny dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold air. Then a lamp came bobbing over his head, over the heads of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years over here, all here." "All right there, Harry." Hagrid's big face beamed over a sea of heads. "Come on, follow me. Any more first years, mind your step. First years, follow me." Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was dark either side of them. It was that dark either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. "You'll get your first sight of Hogwarts in a second," Hagrid called just over his shoulder. "Just round this bend here." There was a loud "Oh!" and the narrow path opened suddenly on an edge of a great black lake. Perched atop of a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. No more than 4 to a boat," Hagrid said, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water on the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. "Everyone in," shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. "Right then, forward!" And the little fleet of boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. "Heads down!" yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy which hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a sort of underground harbour where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. "Oh, you there? Is this your Toad?" said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. "Trevor!" cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hand. Then they clambered up a passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto a smooth, damp grass right in front of the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around a huge front door. "Everyone here? You there? Still got your Toad?" Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. And that is when they have reached Hogwarts, and we will go to the next bit when they enter into the Great Hall tomorrow. Okay, have a lovely day. Bye.